A seemingly routine adoption hearing becomes the catalyst for exposing a major conspiracy when 8-year-old Tommy Parker says, "They said you died," to his father, who appears at the courthouse. His father, James, who had been on a classified military mission, discovers that his wife had uncovered corruption within the Whitmore Foundation before her death. Critical evidence of the foundation's criminal activities involving adoptions is hidden in Tommy's teddy bear. Together, father and son help expose the foundation's crimes, leading to convictions of those responsible. Before we jump back into the video, let us know where you're watching from and if you're enjoying this story. Don't forget to subscribe because I have something really special for you tomorrow. And now, back to the video. Judge Sarah Mitchell had presided over hundreds of adoption cases in her 15 years on the family court bench, but something about tomorrow's hearing kept her awake tonight. Maybe it was the way the caseworker had hesitated when submitting the final paperwork, or perhaps the unusual request for extra security in the courtroom. In her home office, surrounded by case files and family law books, she reviewed the details one more time. 8-year-old Tommy Parker's case seemed straightforward. On paper, mother deceased, father's rights terminated due to abandonment, loving foster family ready to adopt. But 2 decades of legal experience had taught her that the simplest cases often held the most surprises. "Still working?" her husband David asked, setting a cup of tea beside her desk. "It's nearly midnight." "Something about this Parker case," she replied, rubbing her tired eyes. "Can't shake the feeling I'm missing something." The file photos showed a small boy with serious brown eyes and a hesitant smile. Tommy had been in the foster system for 3 years, ever since his mother's death in a car accident. His father, James Parker, had disappeared shortly after, leaving no forwarding address or contact information. The Hendersons, Tommy's foster family for the past 2 years, were exemplary candidates for adoption. Robert Henderson was a high school teacher, his wife Maria a pediatric nurse. They had glowing recommendations from social services and a stable home environment. Tomorrow's hearing should be a formality, one more happy ending in a system that desperately needed them. But Sarah couldn't shake her unease. Something in Tommy's latest psychological evaluation caught her attention. The boy was doing well in school, had formed strong attachments to the Hendersons, yet occasionally asked about his father. Not unusual for a child his age, but the therapist's notes suggested a deeper complexity to these inquiries. Her clerk had already prepared the courtroom for tomorrow's hearing. Standard adoption proceedings were usually quick affairs, 15 minutes of formal questions, signatures, and congratulations. But Sarah had requested a full hour for this one, another decision based purely on instinct. The phone on her desk rang, startling her. At this hour, it could only be an emergency. "Judge Mitchell," she answered. "Your Honor, it's Detective Cooper." The police detective's voice was tense. "About tomorrow's Parker adoption, there's been a development." Sarah reached for her legal pad. "Go on." "James Parker was just picked up in Chicago. He's demanding to stop the adoption." Sarah's unease crystallized into understanding. "He's been gone for 3 years. Why now?" "That's the thing, Judge. He claims he never abandoned his son. Says he can prove it." Sarah glanced at the clock. 12:15 a.m. In less than 9 hours, she would have to make a decision that would change multiple lives forever. The seemingly simple adoption had just become anything but. "Has he retained counsel?" she asked, already knowing tomorrow would be more challenging than expected. "Public Defender's Office is assigning someone first thing in the morning. But Judge, he's insisting on being there. We can arrange video conference from Chicago, but—" "No," Sarah interrupted. "If he wants to be heard, he needs to be in my courtroom. Can Chicago PD get him here?" "They're arranging transport now. But Judge, there's more. When we ran his current information, well, you should see this for yourself. I'm sending it to your secure email." Sarah opened the attachment and felt her breath catch. The simple adoption case had just become something far more complex. Tomorrow's hearing would not be the straightforward proceeding she'd expected. Instead, it would become one of the most memorable moments of her judicial career, though not for any reason she could possibly anticipate. She looked again at Tommy's photo in the case file. Those serious brown eyes seemed to hold secrets now, questions that tomorrow's hearing would have to answer. Sarah had always prided herself on running an orderly courtroom, on maintaining the proper decorum that justice required. But something told her that tomorrow all her carefully maintained protocols were about to be challenged in ways she never expected. "One more thing, Judge," Detective Cooper added. "The boy, he doesn't know his father's been found." The Hendersons thought it best to wait until after the hearing. Sarah nodded, though alone in her office. "Probably wise. Anything else I should know?" "Just be prepared for tomorrow, Your Honor. I've got a feeling it's going to be an interesting morning." After hanging up, Sarah sat back in her chair, staring at the case file spread across her desk. In a few hours, she would have to navigate one of the most delicate situations family court could present. A last-minute challenge to an adoption by a parent who had seemingly abandoned their child. The law was clear in these cases, but the human element was always complex, always unpredictable. She thought of Tommy Parker, probably asleep right now in his foster home, unaware that tomorrow's supposedly happy occasion was about to become something very different. Children often surprised her in the courtroom, their resilience, their insight, their unexpected wisdom. Tomorrow would test all her experience, all her judgment, and as she would soon discover, all her assumptions about this case. The courthouse buzzed with unusual tension that morning. Judge Mitchell arrived early, her black robes feeling heavier than normal. 2 police officers stood outside her courtroom, an unusual sight for an adoption hearing. James Parker arrived, in custody at 8:45 a.m., escorted by Chicago PD. He wasn't what Sarah expected. Despite 3 years of apparent absence, he wore a pressed suit and carried himself with military bearing. His public defender, Amy Chen, whispered urgently with him as they took their seats. The Hendersons entered next with Tommy, all dressed, in their Sunday best. The boy fidgeted with his tie, unaware that his father sat just 2 rows behind him. Maria Henderson kept glancing nervously at the police officers, sensing something wasn't right. "All rise," the bailiff called at precisely 9 a.m. Sarah took her seat, surveying the tension in her courtroom. The caseworker sat rigid in her chair, clutching a thick folder. Detective Cooper stood by the door, hand near his weapon. "Before we begin these adoption proceedings," Sarah announced, "there's been a significant development." Tommy looked up, his serious brown eyes finding hers. In that moment, Sarah knew this hearing would change lives forever. She just didn't realize how much. As she prepared to explain James Parker's presence, she had no way of knowing that in just a few minutes, 4 words from a small boy would stun everyone into silence and change everything they thought they knew about this case. "Your Honor," Amy Chen rose quickly. "Before you continue, my client would like to address the court." Judge Mitchell studied James Parker carefully. In the harsh, fluorescent lighting of the courtroom, she could see the resemblance to Tommy, the same serious eyes, the same determined set of the jaw. But there was something else in Parker's face. Desperation mixed with what looked like genuine pain. "Mr. Parker," Sarah began, "you understand these proceedings were scheduled to finalize your son's adoption. Your parental rights were terminated due to abandonment over 8 months ago." "That's just it, Your Honor." Parker's voice was steady, but urgent. "I never abandoned my son. I was serving my country." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The Hendersons exchanged worried glances while their attorney shuffled through papers, clearly caught off guard. "Your Honor," the state's attorney interjected, "Mr. Parker's rights were terminated after extensive attempts to locate him. He left no forwarding address, made no contact attempts, provided no support." Because I couldn't. Parker's composure cracked slightly. I was deep undercover with special forces. The mission was classified. I couldn't make contact without risking national security and lives. Tommy, who had been quietly playing with his tie, suddenly sat up straighter. He hadn't turned around yet, hadn't seen his father, but something in that voice made his small shoulders tense. Sarah glanced at Detective Cooper, who gave a slight nod. The background check she'd received last night confirmed Parker's story, at least parts of it. He had indeed been deployed on a classified mission, but there were still questions. Mr. Parker, Sarah kept her voice neutral. Why didn't you make arrangements before your deployment, establish guardianship, set up support payments? I did, Your Honor. Parker nodded to his attorney, who approached the bench with a thick folder. My sister, Rebecca Parker, was supposed to take custody. She had power of attorney, access to my accounts to support Tommy. But Rebecca Parker died in the same car accident as Tommy's mother, Amy Chen completed softly. The documentation was lost in the chaos that followed. By the time Mr. Parker's mission ended and he could surface, Tommy was already in the system. The Hendersons' attorney stood. Your Honor, regardless of Mr. Parker's circumstances, the boy has been with my clients for 2 years. They're the only stable family he's known. To disrupt that now, he's my son. Parker's control finally broke. Everything I did, every mission, was to make the world safer for him. I never stopped fighting to get back to him. Tommy turned then, for the first time seeing his father. The courtroom fell silent, holding its collective breath as father and son locked eyes across the space. Tommy? Maria Henderson reached for him, but the boy was already standing. Judge Mitchell started to call for order, to remind everyone of proper courtroom procedure, but the words died in her throat as Tommy spoke. 4 simple words that would change everything. They said you died. The silence that followed was absolute. Sarah watched as all the color drained from Maria Henderson's face, while Robert Henderson seemed to physically deflate in his chair. The state's attorney was frantically flipping through documents, and even Amy Chen looked shocked. What did you say, Tommy? Sarah asked gently, though the boy's eyes never left his father's face. They told me he died. Tommy's voice grew stronger. When Mom and Aunt Becky died, the lady from the office said my dad died too. That's why I had to go to foster care. James Parker took an involuntary step forward, stopped only by Detective Cooper's restraining hand. Son, I never died. I was serving our country. I tried so hard to get back to you.
The state's attorney was now having an urgent whispered conversation with the caseworker, whose face had gone pale. Sarah noticed she was clutching her folder so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Ms. Reynolds, Sarah addressed the case.
Worker directly. Would you care to explain why Tommy was told his father was deceased? The woman's voice trembled. Your Honor, when we couldn't locate Mr. Parker, when all our inquiries to military channels went unanswered, it seemed kinder to tell the boy his father had died than that he'd been abandoned. Kinder? Parker's voice was dangerous now. You told my son I was dead because it was kinder? Sarah raised her gavel, restoring order before emotions could escalate further. But as she looked at Tommy, still standing, still staring at the father he'd thought was dead, she knew this case had just become something much bigger than a simple adoption hearing. The truth was unraveling in her courtroom, and with it, all the careful plans and procedures she'd relied on. Because sometimes justice wasn't about following protocol. Sometimes it was about listening to 4 words from a child that could expose a system's failures and change lives forever. Judge Sarah Mitchell had seen many dramatic moments in her courtroom, but nothing quite like this. The revelation that Tommy had been told his father was dead had shifted the entire dynamic of the case. She called for a 30-minute recess, ordering all parties to remain in the building. Ms. Reynolds, Sarah addressed the caseworker before leaving the bench. I want every document related to this case in my chambers. Every note, every email, every phone record, everything. In her chambers, Sarah barely had time to begin reviewing the new documents when Detective Cooper knocked on her door. "Judge, you need to see this." He laid a file on her desk. "We've been doing some digging since last night. The deeper we go, the worse it gets." The file contained internal emails from the Department of Children's Services dating back 3 years. What Sarah read made her blood run cold. There had been inquiries about James Parker's status, not just from the military, but from his commanding officer and even a senator's office. All had been either ignored or deliberately misdirected. "Someone wanted this adoption to happen," Cooper said quietly. "Someone with enough influence to bury inquiries and falsify reports." "But why?" Sarah asked, though she was beginning to see a pattern in the documents. "Why target this particular case?" "Look at the Hendersons' financials," Cooper pointed to another page. "Specifically where their adoption funding came from." Sarah's eyes widened as she traced the money trail. The seemingly modest teacher and nurse had received substantial grants from a private foundation, a foundation connected to one of the state's most powerful political families. A knock at the chamber door interrupted them. It was Amy Chen, James Parker's attorney, looking grim. "Your Honor, my client needs to tell you something. Something that might explain all of this." When they reconvened in the courtroom, the tension was palpable. Tommy had been taken to a separate room with a court counselor, but everyone else remained. The Hendersons sat closer together now, whispering urgently with their attorney. "Mr. Parker," Sarah began, "you have something to add to these proceedings?" James Parker stood, his military bearing evident despite his obvious emotional strain. "Yes, Your Honor. I believe I know why someone wanted my son to think I was dead. It's about his mother, and what she knew." The courtroom fell silent as Parker continued. "Before my deployment, Jenny, my wife, was working as an accountant for the Whitmore Foundation. She discovered irregularities in their books, evidence of money laundering and tax fraud on a massive scale." Sarah noticed Robert Henderson flinch at the mention of the Whitmore Foundation. His attorney immediately began writing furiously on a legal pad. "Jenny was gathering evidence, planning to turn it over to authorities when I returned from deployment. Only Rebecca, my sister, knew the details. They were together the night of the crash." Parker's voice cracked slightly. "The crash that was ruled an accident." Detective Cooper stepped forward. "Your Honor, in light of this information, Chicago PD has reopened the investigation into the accident that killed Jenny Parker and Rebecca Parker. Preliminary findings suggest it wasn't an accident at all." The implications hung heavy in the air. Sarah looked at the Hendersons, seeing them with new eyes. Were they innocent parties in this conspiracy, or knowing participants? Maria Henderson suddenly stood, shrugging off her husband's restraining hand. "Your Honor, I can't do this anymore." Her voice shook with emotion. "We didn't know at first. They told us it was a normal adoption, that Tommy's family was all gone. But then the money started coming and the instructions. Maria, stop!" Robert Henderson tried to interrupt, but his wife continued. "They told us to never let Tommy talk about his father, to discourage any questions about his past. The foundation paid for everything. Our house, our cars, even private. School tuition for Tommy. We thought we were giving him a better life, but..." Her voice trailed off as her husband put his head in his hands. Their attorney was already reaching for his phone, likely calling for backup counsel. Sarah straightened in her chair, her decision crystallizing. "Detective Cooper, I want the Whitmore."
Foundation's representatives in this courtroom within the hour. Ms. Reynolds, you will surrender your phone and laptop to the police immediately."
"No one leaves this building without my express permission." She turned to James Parker, seeing the mix of anger and pain on his face. "Mr. Parker, I need to know exactly what your wife discovered about the foundation. Every detail." As Parker began to speak, the full scope of the conspiracy began to emerge. The Whitmore Foundation, run by one of the state's most prominent families, had been using their charitable operations to conceal millions in illegal transactions. Jenny, Parker had stumbled upon evidence that could have destroyed not just the foundation, but several political careers. The car crash happened 2 days after Jenny backed up all the foundation's records, Parker explained. She mailed copies to our safety deposit box, a box only Tommy can access after his 18th birthday. They couldn't find the evidence, but they could make sure Tommy never learned the truth about his inheritance. Sarah glanced at the case documents with new understanding. Every decision, every filing, every placement had been carefully orchestrated to separate Tommy from his past and from the evidence that could expose a massive criminal enterprise. The case was no longer about a simple adoption. It had become about murder, conspiracy, and the exploitation of a child welfare system meant to protect the vulnerable. And at the center of it all was an 8-year-old boy who had spoken 4 simple words that began to unravel everything. They said you died. As Sarah prepared to issue her next series of orders, her courtroom doors opened. A team of FBI agents entered, led by a stern-faced woman who immediately approached the bench. Judge Mitchell? I'm Special Agent Wilson. We've been investigating the Whitmore Foundation for the past year. I believe what's happening in your courtroom today is about to break our case wide open. The simple adoption hearing had become something none of them could have anticipated, the key to exposing a criminal conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of state power. And it all started because a child dared to speak the truth in front of the right people at the right moment. Special Agent Wilson wasted no time taking control of the situation. Within minutes, her team had secured the courtroom and begun collecting devices from everyone present. The Hendersons' attorney was now accompanied by a criminal defense lawyer, who kept shaking his head at his client's attempts to speak. Your Honor, Wilson addressed Judge Mitchell, we need to move Tommy to a secure location. The people involved in this conspiracy have already proven they're willing to kill to keep their secrets. Sarah nodded, but James Parker stepped forward. I'm not leaving my son again. Agreed, Wilson replied. We have a safe house ready for both of you, but first we need Tommy to tell us everything he remembers about the safety deposit box. The court counselor brought Tommy back into the courtroom. The boy's eyes immediately found his father, and he ran to him, all protocol forgotten. James knelt down, finally able to hug his son after 3 long years. I knew you couldn't be dead, Tommy whispered, his face buried in his father's shoulder. I kept having this dream where you were trying to tell me something important. Maria Henderson watched the reunion with tears streaming down her face. Her husband sat stone-faced beside her, but his hands trembled as he gripped the defense table. Tommy, Special Agent Wilson approached gently. We need to ask you some questions about your mom, about things she might have told you before the accident. The boy looked up at his father, who nodded encouragingly. Mom made me memorize numbers, Tommy said. She said they were like a special code, and I had to remember them until I saw Dad again. Wilson's team immediately snapped to attention. Can you remember those numbers, Tommy? 719382, Tommy recited without hesitation. She made me practice every night. Said it was our secret game. James Parker's eyes widened. The safety deposit box. Jenny must have changed the number before the accident. She knew they were watching her. There's more, Tommy added. Mom said if anything happened, I should look in my bear. Your bear? Sarah leaned forward, intrigued. Mr. Growls. He's at the Hendersons' house. Mom sewed him up the night before she and Aunt Becky went for their drive. Maria Henderson gasped. The teddy bear. That's why they were so insistent we never get rid of any of Tommy's old toys. They've been searching for something all this time. Special Agent Wilson was already on her phone, dispatching agents to secure the Henderson residence. The teddy bear could contain the backup evidence that the conspirators had been trying to find for 3 years. Robert Henderson finally broke his silence. We never knew about the murders. They told us we were helping a traumatized child get a fresh start. The money was supposed to be a grant to help disadvantaged teachers adopt. His wife touched his arm. But you knew something wasn't right. All those late-night meetings with the foundation board. The way they kept pushing us to get rid of Tommy's old things? Mrs. Henderson, Sarah interrupted, are you prepared to make a formal statement about the Foundation's involvement in this adoption? Before Maria could answer, the courtroom doors burst open. A distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit strode in, flanked by attorneys. Sarah recognized Senator William Whitmore, the Foundation's chairman. This hearing is now closed, one of his attorneys announced. We have a federal injunction. No, you don't, Special Agent Wilson cut him off, producing her own document. What you have is a federal indictment. Senator Whitmore, you're under arrest for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and accessory to murder. The senator's face contorted with rage. You have no idea what you're dealing with. That boy's mother was a thief who was gathering evidence of your crimes. James Parker stepped forward, shielding Tommy behind him. And now her son is going to finish what she started. The numbers, Senator. Tommy spoke up suddenly, his voice clear and strong. Mom said they'd prove everything. She said the truth always comes out if you're brave enough to tell it. Sarah watched the color drain from Senator Whitmore's face as he realized a child's memory might bring down his entire criminal empire. The FBI agents moved to take him into custody while his attorneys frantically made calls. James hugged Tommy closer. Your mom would be so proud of you, son. You kept her secret safe all this time. Like a mission? Tommy looked up at his father, with a hint of a smile. Like the ones you do? Exactly like that. The most important mission of all, protecting the truth. As the senator was led away in handcuffs, Sarah caught Special Agent Wilson's eye. There would be months of investigations ahead, dozens of conspirators to arrest, and a complex criminal enterprise to unravel. But for now, the most important thing was protecting the boy who had unknowingly carried the key to it all. The FBI's forensics team worked carefully to extract the contents of Mr. Growls in their mobile lab outside the courthouse. Tommy sat with his father in Judge Mitchell's chambers, both watching through the window as agents delicately removed the teddy bear's stitching. Mom did it with her special red thread, Tommy explained. She said red was for love and bravery. Special Agent Wilson entered the chambers, holding a small plastic evidence bag. Inside was a micro SD card, sewn carefully into the bear's stuffing. Jenny. Parker was brilliant, Wilson said, handing the bag to a technician. She hid her evidence in the one place they'd never think to look too closely, her son's favorite toy. Even if they found it, destroying a child's teddy bear would have raised too many questions. Sarah watched as James pulled Tommy closer. That's why they wanted the adoption rushed, he said. Once it was final, they could gradually distance Tommy from anything connected to his past. The technician's laptop pinged. Files are decrypting now. Mrs. Parker used her son's birthday as the key. Data began flooding the screen. Bank records, emails, offshore account numbers. My God, Wilson breathed, scanning the documents. This goes way beyond the Whitmore Foundation. Government contracts, judicial bribes, evidence of at least 3 other murders disguised as accidents. Sarah felt sick as she recognized some of the names in the files. Colleagues, politicians, community leaders, all implicated in a web of corruption that had claimed the lives of a mother and aunt who dared to expose it. Tommy tugged at his father's sleeve. Dad, does this mean we can go home now? The simple question brought tears to James's eyes. Home is wherever we're together, buddy. But first we have to make sure these people can't hurt anyone else. Maria Henderson had been waiting quietly in the corner. Tommy, she said softly, I'm so sorry. We really did love you. We got caught up in something terrible. The boy studied his foster mother for a long moment. You were nice to me, he said finally. But you knew I wasn't really angry at Dad for leaving. You knew he didn't abandon me. Robert Henderson was cooperating with the FBI in another room, detailing years of Foundation manipulation. His wife would soon join him, their testimony crucial to unraveling the conspiracy. "Your Honor," Wilson addressed Sarah, "we need to move quickly. Once word of these arrests spreads, other conspirators will try to run. We've already got teams moving on the Foundation's offices, but..." She was interrupted by Detective Cooper bursting into the chambers. "Judge, Special Agent, you need to see this. Senator Whitmore was found dead in his holding cell. They're calling it a heart attack, but nothing's natural about this," Wilson finished grimly. "They're tying up loose ends." Sarah made a swift decision. "I'm issuing an emergency order placing Tommy in his father's sole custody, effective immediately. Get them to your safe house now." "Wait," Tommy said suddenly. He walked over to Maria Henderson and hugged her. "Thank you for taking care of me. Mom would want me to say that." The gesture brought fresh tears to Maria's eyes. Even in the midst of exposing a criminal conspiracy, an 8-year-old boy could show more grace than most adults. As FBI agents prepared to move Tommy and James to safety, Sarah noticed something else in the teddy bear's stuffing. A folded piece of paper with Jenny Parker's handwriting. "For Tommy," she read aloud. "Remember that the biggest prayers come in the smallest packages, and the greatest courage often comes from the smallest hearts. Trust your dad. Trust the truth. Love, Mom." The words seemed to fill the room with Jenny Parker's presence. She had known the risks, had prepared for the worst, and had entrusted her greatest evidence to her greatest love, her son. She knew, James said softly. She knew they might come for her, so she made sure the truth would survive through Tommy. Sarah watched father and son leave under heavy FBI protection, knowing this was far from over. The evidence in the teddy bear would shake the state's power structure to its core. But for now, she took comfort in knowing that at least one family torn apart by corruption was finally reunited. The day that had started with 4 stunning words from a child was ending with thousands of damning words from his mother, reaching out from the past to expose the truth she'd died protecting. The FBI safe house was a modest cabin on the outskirts of town, surrounded by dense forest and under constant surveillance. Inside, Tommy sat at a kitchen table with his father, sharing their first meal together in 3 years. It was just peanut, butter, and jelly sandwiches, but to both of them, it felt like a feast. Mom used to cut them diagonal, Tommy observed, studying his sandwich. She said it made them taste better. James immediately reached for the knife. Well, we can't argue with Mom's sandwich wisdom, can we? Special Agent Wilson watched the interaction from her makeshift command center in the living room. Screens displayed news coverage of Senator Whitmore's death, while her team tracked the ripple effects through the state's power structure. 3 judges had suddenly announced their retirement. 2 Foundation board members had already fled the country. The Henderson woman's talking, her deputy reported. Says the Foundation had a whole network of foster families. Clean records, respectable jobs, but all taking payments to help hide kids who might have evidence against them. How many children? Wilson asked, dreading the answer. At least 12 in the last 5 years. All cases involving parents who'd discovered Foundation irregularities. All deaths ruled accidents or natural causes. In the kitchen, Tommy was showing his father a coin trick he'd learned. "Mr. Henderson taught me. He wasn't all bad, was he?" James struggled with the answer. "Sometimes good people make bad choices, son. But you're right, they did care about you, even if they were involved in something wrong." A phone rang in the command center. Judge Mitchell was calling with updates from the courthouse. "The Foundation's entire board has been indicted," she told Wilson. "But we've got a bigger problem. I've been going through Jenny Parker's files. The corruption goes all the way to the governor's office." "That tracks with what we're finding," Wilson replied, watching Tommy teach his father the coin trick. The Foundation wasn't just laundering money. They were buying influence, rigging contracts, controlling adoptions to hide evidence of their crimes. "And killing anyone who got too close," Sarah added grimly. Jenny Parker wasn't their first victim, just the most thorough in collecting evidence. Tommy's laughter drifted from the kitchen. a sound of pure joy as his father deliberately fumbled the coin trick. Wilson felt her throat tighten. In all the complexity of the case, it was easy to forget that at its heart was a little boy who'd carried a terrible burden without even knowing it. "We found something else in the bear," Sarah continued. "A video file. Jenny recorded a message the night before she died. I think Tommy and his father should see it." Wilson glanced at the reunited family, now working together to master the coin trick. "They've been through so much already. Are you sure?" Jenny knew she might not survive exposing the truth. She left this for them. They deserved to hear her voice one last time. After hanging up, Wilson approached the kitchen. "Tommy, your mom left something else in Mr. Growl's. Would you and your dad like to see it?" The boy's eyes widened. James squeezed, his shoulder supportively. "Together?" "Together," Wilson confirmed, setting up her laptop. Jenny Parker's face filled the screen, beautiful and determined. She was sitting in what looked like a home office, speaking directly to the camera. "Tommy, my brave boy, if you're watching this, then what I feared has happened. But you did it. You kept the evidence safe until you could get it to your father. I'm so proud of you." Tears streamed down Tommy's face as his mother's voice filled the cabin. James held him close, his own eyes glistening. "James, my love," Jenny continued, "I'm sorry for putting this burden on our son, but I knew they were watching me, and Tommy was the only one they'd never suspect, the only one they couldn't search without raising questions." She explained more about the foundation's crimes, providing context for the evidence she'd gathered. But her final words were personal, meant only for her family. "Remember that love is stronger than fear, truth is stronger than lies, and family is stronger than distance. Tommy, help your father learn to cut sandwiches properly. James, teach our son that doing the right thing matters, even when it's dangerous. And both of you know that I love you, forever and always." The video ended, leaving the cabin in silence except for soft sobs. Father and son clung to each other, sharing their grief and love and relief at being reunited. Wilson quietly withdrew to the command center, giving them privacy. The investigation would continue, the conspiracy would unravel, more arrests would be made. But right now, in this safe house in the woods, a family was healing. And somewhere, Wilson believed, Jenny Parker was smiling at her final victory, not just in exposing corruption, but in bringing her son and husband back together to carry on her legacy of courage and truth. Dawn broke over the safe house with urgent news. The governor had called an emergency press conference, attempting to distance himself from the Whitmore Foundation scandal. But Jenny Parker's evidence was already spreading through media channels. Impossible to contain. "They're running scared," Special Agent Wilson told James as they watched the coverage. Tommy was still asleep, exhausted from the emotional revelations of the previous day. 3 more Foundation board members were found, dead in apparent suicides. "They're cleaning house," James replied grimly. "How many other families did they destroy? How many other children did they use to hide their crimes?" Wilson's phone buzzed with an update from Judge Mitchell. The Hendersons had provided a complete list of other foster families involved in the Foundation's scheme. FBI teams were already moving to secure more children who might be in danger. "Maria Henderson's testimony is crucial," Wilson explained. "She's naming names, dates, specific transactions. The whole network is unraveling." A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the safe house windows, they saw multiple SUVs approaching. Wilson's hand went to her weapon, but then she recognized Judge Mitchell in the lead vehicle. "We need to move you," Sarah announced as she entered. "One of the Foundation's security teams went rogue. They're hunting for anyone who can testify against them." James was already moving toward Tommy's room when gunfire erupted outside. Wilson's protective detail returned fire as bullets shattered the cabin's windows. "Here." Wilson led them to a concealed panic room. "Standard FBI safe house feature." Tommy had woken up during the chaos, but showed remarkable composure for an 8-year-old. Like in the movies? He asked as the heavy door sealed behind them. Better, his father assured him. These are the good guys protecting us. Through reinforced monitors, they watched Wilson's team engage the attackers. The Foundation's mercenaries were professional, but they hadn't expected such heavy FBI resistance. Your mom's evidence is being broadcast nationwide, Sarah told Tommy as they waited. She's saving lives even now. Other families who lost loved ones to the Foundation are coming forward. The gunfire outside intensified, then suddenly stopped. Wilson's voice came through the intercom. Clear. We got them all. 4 Foundation mercenaries in custody. As they emerged from the panic room, Tommy noticed something in the cabin's wreckage. Mr. Growls had fallen behind a couch, somehow untouched by the violence. He's still protecting us, Tommy said softly, hugging the bear. Just like Mom knew he would. Sarah watched the boy with his teddy bear, marveling at his resilience. In the background, news coverage showed the governor announcing his resignation. More dominoes falling as Jenny Parker's evidence exposed the full scope of corruption. The U.S. Attorney General is personally overseeing the case now, Wilson informed them. We're moving you to a more secure location until the trials begin. You'll both need to testify. Tommy looked up at his father. Will you tell them about Mom? About how brave she was? James knelt beside his son. We both will, buddy. Your mom trusted you with the truth, and you kept it safe until the right moment. Now we make sure everyone knows what she fought for. As they prepared to leave the bullet-riddled cabin, Sarah reflected on how 4 simple words in her courtroom had started this cascade of justice. Tommy's declaration, "They said you died," had cracked open a conspiracy that had seemed impenetrable. Wilson's team escorted them to armored vehicles, ready for the next phase of protection. The morning news was already calling it the biggest corruption scandal in state history, but to Sarah it was also a story of a mother's love, a father's determination, and a child's unwavering trust in the truth. Judge, Tommy called as they prepared to leave. Thank you for listening to me in court. Mom always said that sometimes the biggest truths come from the smallest voices. Sarah smiled, touching the small bear in Tommy's arms. Your mom was right about a lot of things, Tommy. And thanks to you and Mr. Growls here, everyone will finally know just how right she was. The convoy pulled away from the safe house just as more news broke. The Foundation's international accounts had been frozen, its operations suspended worldwide. Jenny Parker's evidence was bringing down not just a corrupt organization, but an entire network of power built on stolen lives and silenced voices. And it all started because a little boy dared to speak the truth in front of people who were ready to listen. 3 weeks after the shootout at the safe house, Tommy sat in a special witness preparation room at the federal courthouse. The space had been designed to be child-friendly, with comfortable furniture and colorful walls, but it couldn't completely hide its serious purpose. Remember, the child advocacy lawyer explained gently, you only have to tell what you remember. No one expects you to know everything. Tommy clutched Mr. Growls, now carefully repaired after FBI forensics had finished with him. I remember it all, he said quietly. Mom's special numbers, the night she sewed up Mr. Growls, the way she hugged me extra long before she left with Aunt Becky. James watched from nearby, his heart aching at his son's clear memories of his last moments with Jenny. The grand jury would convene tomorrow, and Tommy would be their first witness. Special Agent Wilson entered with Judge Mitchell, both carrying stacks of documents. The investigation had expanded far beyond their state, uncovering similar Foundation operations in 3 other jurisdictions. 12 more families have come forward, Sarah told James, all with similar stories. Parents who discovered Foundation irregularities, mysterious accidents, children placed with Foundation-controlled foster families. But none as thorough as Jenny, Wilson added. None who managed to preserve their evidence so cleverly. Your wife's documentation is the keystone of our entire case. Tommy looked up at the mention of his mother. Dad says Mom was like a superhero, in disguise, looking normal on the outside but fighting bad guys in secret. That's exactly what she was, Sarah agreed, sitting beside him. And you know what? You're a lot like her. It takes real courage to tell the truth when people want you to stay quiet. The door opened, and Maria Henderson entered, escorted by federal marshals. She'd been granted limited immunity in exchange for her testimony and had proven invaluable in understanding the Foundation's networks. "Tommy," she said hesitantly, "I wanted to see you before tomorrow, to tell you how sorry I am and how proud your mother would be of you." The boy studied his former foster mother for a long moment. "Did you know about Mom and the accident?" Maria shook her head, tears forming. "No, not at first. When we started to suspect something wasn't right, we were already in too deep. They had pictures of our families, knew where our relatives lived. We were trapped." "But you're telling the truth now," Tommy said. "That's what matters. Mom always said it's never too late to do the right thing." His simple forgiveness seemed to hit Maria harder than any condemnation could have. She sobbed quietly as the marshals led her out to continue her preparation for testimony. "The Foundation's remaining board members are trying to make deals," Wilson updated them. "Everyone's pointing fingers trying to save themselves. The whole house of cards is collapsing." "Good," James said firmly. "Let them turn on each other. Jenny's evidence will make sure none of them escape justice this time." Sarah watched Tommy, who was showing his father a drawing he'd made of the courtroom. "You know, in 20 years on the bench, I've never seen anything quite like this. A conspiracy this big, brought down by a mother's love, a child's memory, and a teddy bear. Sometimes the biggest changes come from the smallest things," Tommy said, echoing his mother's words, "like 4 words in a courtroom." The adults exchanged glances, still amazed at the wisdom that could come from such a young voice. Tomorrow, Tommy would tell his story to the grand jury. His words would help indict some of the most powerful people in the state. But right now, he was just a boy showing his father his artwork, finding healing in these quiet moments of normalcy. "Your mom had one more message in her files," Wilson said softly. "One we didn't show you before. It was addressed to both of you." She handed James a tablet. On it was a simple text file, dated the night before Jenny died. "To my boys, remember that justice is like a seed. It may be small, it may take time to grow, but once planted, it cannot be stopped. Water it with truth, nurture it with courage, and watch it bloom. I love you both more than all the stars in the sky. Keep shining your light." Tommy leaned against his father as they read Jenny's words together. Tomorrow, they would face the grand jury, would help bring down the corrupt foundation that had torn their family apart. But tonight, they had this moment, this connection, this piece of Jenny's love reaching out to them across time. "Mom was right," Tommy said, hugging Mr. Growls. The truth did grow. It just needed time and a safe place to hide until it was ready. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered in anticipation of tomorrow's proceedings. But inside this room, a father and son held onto each other and a teddy bear, proving that love and truth could survive any darkness, could overcome any conspiracy, could bloom even in the hardest soil. 6 months after Tommy's 4 words in Judge Mitchell's courtroom changed everything, he sat with his father in that same courtroom for the final sentencing hearing. The chamber was packed, but silent, as Sarah prepared to deliver her last judgment. In the Whitmore Foundation case, 23 people had been convicted, including former Foundation board members, corrupt officials, and the conspirators behind Jenny and Rebecca's murders. Maria Henderson had received a reduced sentence in exchange for her cooperation. Robert Henderson would serve longer, his deeper involvement in the Foundation's schemes requiring stricter punishment. Tommy wore a new suit for the occasion, Mr. Growls tucked safely in his backpack. At 9 years old now, he carried himself with a quiet confidence that reminded everyone of his mother. "Before I deliver the sentences," Sarah began, "I want to acknowledge the extraordinary courage that brought us here. Not just the bravery of Jenny Parker, who gave her life to expose this corruption, but the incredible strength of her son Tommy, who carried her truth until the right moment to share it." The boy sat straighter in his seat as the judge continued. "This case has led to the discovery of 15 other families who lost loved ones to the Foundation's crimes. 42 children have been reunited with relatives who were told they had abandoned them. Over $300 million in stolen funds have been recovered. But numbers cannot measure the true impact of what happened in this courtroom 6 months ago." Sarah paused, looking directly at Tommy. 4 words from a child. "They said you died," cracked open a conspiracy that seemed unbreakable. Itafa reminds us that truth often comes from unexpected sources, and justice sometimes wears the face of a child holding a teddy bear. After delivering the sentences, Sarah called Tommy and James forward. "There's one more order of business," she said, pulling out a familiar document. "The official reversal of termination of parental rights, and the legal recognition of James Parker's custody of his son. Though I think we all know that your family bond was never truly broken." As she signed the papers, Tommy reached into his backpack and pulled out Mr. Growls. "Mom would want to be here for this part," he explained. Special Agent Wilson, watching from the gallery, wiped away a tear. The investigation had led to reforms in child services across multiple states, preventing other families from being exploited by corrupt institutions. After the hearing, they gathered in Sarah's chambers one last time. The judge had announced her retirement, feeling no case could ever be more meaningful than this one. "I have something for you," she told Tommy, presenting him with a frame. Inside was the court transcript of that pivotal moment 6 months ago, when 4 words from a child changed everything. Below it was a quote from Jenny's hidden files. "The smallest voice speaking truth can shake the highest towers of deception." "Your mother would be so proud of the man you're becoming," Sarah said softly. "You carried her truth, protected her evidence, and showed us all what real courage looks like." Tommy studied the frame carefully. "Can we hang it next to Mom's picture?" "At home?" he asked his father. "Of course," James replied. "Right where it belongs." They had moved back into their old house, carefully restored after years of absence. Tommy's room was the same blue color Jenny had painted it, though now it featured a special shelf where Mr. Growls sat proudly, watching over the family he had helped reunite. As they prepared to leave the courthouse for the last time, Tommy turned to Judge Mitchell. "Mom always said that sometimes the biggest prayers come in the smallest packages. I didn't understand what she meant until now." Sarah knelt to his level. "And what do you think she meant?" "That you don't have to be big or powerful to make things right. You just have to be brave enough to speak the truth, even if it's just 4 words." Outside, reporters waited to cover the final chapter of what they called the Teddy Bear Truth case. But inside that chamber, a judge, a federal agent, a father, and a young boy shared a moment of quiet victory, not just over corruption and crime, but over the darkness that had threatened to separate a family forever. Tommy held his father's hand as they finally walked out, Mr. Growls tucked safely in his backpack. Jenny Parker's legacy lived on, not just in the justice she had sparked or the corruption she had exposed, but in the son who had carried her truth and the family that could never truly be broken. And somewhere, they all believed, Jenny was smiling, knowing that her biggest prayer had indeed come in the smallest package, a boy brave enough to speak 4 words that changed everything. The end.